I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're diving into a high-stakes world of World War II espionage. It is a thriller that will leave you on the edge of your seat. The name of the book, The Eagle Scout Picture by Dr. Gary Kidney. It follows a young farm boy turned spy as he infiltrates Nazi Germany, risking everything to aid the Allies. It is packed with deception, survival, and moral dilemmas, and this book is a historical thriller that is a must-read for fans of books like Eye of the Needle and All the Light We Cannot See. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below the interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app, streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Gary, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I understand this book is born out of a conversation that you had with a stranger on a beach. That's a compelling beginning. Tell us what happened there.
Sure. I was in my 40s and this man was in his 80s. We were at a celebration from work at a beach. And he was sitting all by himself at a picnic table while everybody else ran off to the water. Kind of feeling sorry for the man, I sat down with him and started talking. He knew that I was a fan of history and World War II and started telling me a story. And the story that he told me is the basis for the book, The Eagle Scout Picture.
Amazing, amazing. Tell us a little bit about that conversation. How long did you talk? How did he bring it up? It was his own story, right?
Yes, it's his own story. It came about because he was asking about what I knew about the war, and I told him stories from my two older brothers and some uncles, and that's when he started telling me the story. It was almost unbelievable with the story he told me, and so I started taking notes, and we arranged to meet several other times to gather more information about it. When I heard the story, I said, "Oh, that's unbelievable. You should write a book about it." And he said, "Well, I can't. I promised the US government I wouldn't, but you can write the book for me." And I have now done that.
Amazing. That day, during that first conversation, did you start taking notes, or was that later on that you started taking notes during subsequent conversations?
So the second conversation is when I started taking notes, but I sat down after meeting him and wrote down the basic facts of the story. Yeah. And so in between, so the note-taking live was in a second meeting, and we actually met, I'm going to guess about 8, 9 times, usually over lunch, and laid down the boundaries of that. That gave me an opportunity to ask questions to make sure I had understood what was being talked about.
Amazing, amazing. So how does he begin? I was an Eagle Scout back in 1940, whatever, and I'm recruited to tell us a little bit about how he told you his story.
So the story begins with him as a 17-year-old farm boy. He doesn't really want to be a farm owner and wants to go off for a life of adventure. He really wants to go to Texas A&M and learn about electronics. But 3 men show up at his house and recruit him to be a spy in Nazi Germany. I don't think he has a great deal of choice in the matter because they told him you can either join now or we'll draft you when you're 18. And the same thing's going to happen to you. We're going to send you to Germany as a spy. He kind of idolized Amelia Earhart. And at that time, she was supposedly lost at the ocean, having gone to spy in the Pacific on the Japanese. And so because of that, and probably because of the sense of duty to country that Eagle Scouts swear allegiance to, he decided he would go.
Amazing. And he was kind of uniquely qualified. I understand he was fluent in German?
Yes, so he grew up in Fredericksburg, Texas, which is an enclave of German culture in the middle of Texas. His father and mother came to the United States just before World War I. His father fought in World War I, and at home they spoke only German, and at school he was speaking English. And so actually perfectly fluent in both. And that's one of the reasons that they, I think, took him for this mission. The other was probably his electronics knowledge. And there's a third, but I'm not going to spoil that one for the
Okay.
people who will read the book.
Is the fact that he was an Eagle Scout pertinent to it as well? The reason why he was selected for this mission?
So I think yes. I think they were looking for somebody with that kind of dedication and duty. It's not easy to be an Eagle Scout, and it requires an awful lot of work and a lot of diligence and a lot of learning new things. And I thought they probably figured he was adaptable enough to be able to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people know about Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, but if you're not really into scouting, you don't realize what a prestigious honor it is to be an Eagle Scout. It's an arduous journey that starts as a child and goes into manhood. Tell the folks at home what it takes to be an Eagle Scout,
Well, the
roughly.
Eagle Scout requires an awful lot of effort, learning different kinds of things, which are earning merit badges,
Mhm.
and learning a lot of self-sufficiency. So you've got to be good at as a camper and as an explorer and things of that kind to do well in scouting. It really puts you in the outdoors. And I think one of the things that scouting teaches that is important to this story is the ability to be resilient and solve problems.
Mm,
And I
exactly.
see that my character had to do an awful lot of that to survive in Germany.
Without a doubt. Fred Brown is your character. He's fictionalized in the book. He has a German name in it. Zelly is a short for it. What German name does he take on?
Frederich Zelly Zellner. Zelly is the nickname
Yeah,
that he chooses to go by.
yeah. Tell us about how he infiltrated the Nazis.
So he trained in the US for about 8 months before being sent overseas. He has a partner in his mission, an Italian boy who comes from Brooklyn but pretends to come from Naples. They go together using the Royal Navy taxi service to Naples and then on a train to over the Brenner Pass to Berlin. And then he is a known member in the Hitler Youth and fits right back into the society as if he were there all along. He's been the cover of that part of the story is he's an Italian exchange in the Hitler Youth Exchange program.
Amazing, amazing, amazing that the story itself is amazing, but also amazing is that it's largely true. That's what
Mhm.
I think is mind blowing. And I think that's really the hook of it all is that, this is a great novel, no doubt. It's very, very readable. It transports you back to a, treacherous time in world history. But the fact that somebody actually made this sacrifice, somebody actually put their life on the line like this. And here he is years later, probably pot-bellied and bald, sitting on the beach, telling his story and he's part of the world's greatest generation. And, at one point, I mean, they're getting fewer and fewer nowadays, the men and women of World War II, but we were surrounded by heroes. We were raised by heroes, right?
So, how one becomes a hero is an interesting thing in America. It seems like it's changed a lot. Um, Being a hero, for the most part, involves some kind of sacrifice.
Hmm.
And we now kind of make heroic characters out of movie stars and sports figures.
Hmm.
And that's not a sacrificial life.
Yeah.
Um, it's more self-serving. And so real heroes act out of duty, act out of love for some kind of principle, I think.
Mm.
And it's the principle that is the important thing in the process, not necessarily the making of money.
Yeah.
And so I think that there were so many heroes that came out of World War II whose stories we've never heard, who may be just as intriguing and electrifying as the story in this book, but nobody's ever heard it because didn't really want to talk about that
Yeah.
heroism. They wanted to close the door on that part of their life and get on with things that were much more pleasant.
Yeah. Part of the humility of being a hero as well is that you don't brag that I did this and I did that. You kind of had to drag the stories out of them. You mentioned that your two older brothers served in World War II. You spoke with them about their service. Tell us a little about your conversations with your brother.
So I was 12 and they were in their 40s when I came around in the world. And I was interested in history and wanted to ask them questions. Um, what did you do in the war? Because the war was still very much on people's minds in the time that I was being a baby boomer.
Yeah.
And through lots of persistence and lots of pestering, as a 12-year-old can do to older people, they actually broke down and told me stories. My oldest was in Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked. And the next oldest brother drove landing ships in the Japanese campaign and was present on Iwo Jima on the shoulders of Mount Suribachi when the flag went up for that famous pose from
Oh.
Picture and the statue in Washington, D.C. So their stories, even though they survived, were the impetus to make me listen, I think, to stories like that I've heard from other people.
Yeah. Amazing, amazing. They came from all walks of life, doing jobs that, in many cases, ill prepared them for service. But they all went, like my father went, my uncles all went, everybody went. Everybody had skin in the game in World War II. And it made it a different conflict because everybody was concerned about the outcome of the war, right?
Very much so. It was truly a world war in many ways that we haven't even fathomed yet. I think the repercussions of that war have gone around the world faster than anything else has ever been able to achieve. Even little islands like Aruba have a war story to tell.
Yeah. Amazing, amazing. Have you envisioned this book as a TV series or a film, perhaps?
I would love to see that happen. I think it would make a better mini series or limited series than a full movie. I think the story is going to be difficult to tell in a 2 hour time frame because it is such an epic. But there's enough um, surprise and cliffhangers in the story every now and then that I think it would make a good miniseries broken up by what's going to happen next
Absolutely. And the
activities.
fact that it's based on a true story, I think, is incredible as well. Some of the research that you did for this book, I think, adds to its authenticity. I understand you traveled up to Hyde Park, New York. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so originally I did not believe this man's story, and I put it away in the back of my mind, thinking about it. And I was doing some work in Albany, New York area, and went through Poughkeepsie and said, "Oh, there is the FDR library. I'm going to stop in and take the tour." I took the tour and was really interested in all of the things and the World War II ties that were there. When the tour finished, I asked the docent who gave me the tour, is there any record of what was served in the White House for meals? And he said, yes, it's all a Butler's log that we have here, and we can look anything up. And I said, well, how about this certain day, which I had from the story? What was served in the White House that night? And they told me that was Southern fried chicken and mashed potatoes and martinis. And I said, that all fits with something I was told in my story. And so I said, do you have record of who was there? And they said, yes, it was Roosevelt and Frank Knox, the secretary, and William Donovan, and two unnamed guests.
Wow.
Well, those two unnamed guests seemed to fit perfectly with the two I knew about who had a name.
Amazing, amazing. I love looking at those old menus, in part because it's a little bit of how I was raised. You know, my
Mhm.
parents were of an older generation. My mother was born in 1919, if you can believe it. So I grew up on mashed potatoes and stew and cheese and crackers. And you'd go to a restaurant, they'd serve you cheese and crackers. And I love seeing that on a menu. And you don't see it in restaurants in America at all anymore, you know?
And that's right. The other thing that tipped me off was the fact that they said Eleanor wasn't there. And at the time that this meal happened, that's why he got Southern fried chicken. She kept his diet very regulated.
Amazing, Ellie. Making me hungry for lunch talking about that, that's for sure. Um, Parts of the book are fictionalized. You mentioned that the aftermath or the epilogue of his life is fictionalized. Tell us a little bit about that, about the later years for Fred Brown.
So this man was very successful after his time in Germany, but I had a sense of deep melancholy from him every time that we met. I attributed that melancholy more to he was disappointed with outcomes from there. So he has a girlfriend in Germany, and I had the feeling all along that he still pined for this girlfriend in Germany. And, and I wanted my character to come out of the process a little different than the melancholy I sensed from him. And so I fictionalized the end of the story, well, near the end of the story, by giving him a wife and a child and a successful return to the US. That part was true. Then the very last few lines of the book in the appendix talk about a little of what his life was after the war, and that part is true.
Yeah.
I won't tell what that is because I don't want to give away the spoiler.
Exactly. They actually say for a lot of men who returned from World War II, life did seem kind of drab and boring, that the most exciting aspect of their life happened between the ages of, say, 18 and 24. They were, flying combat missions, they were parachuting out of planes. And let's face it, your life is on the line, it's thrilling, all of that, and everything else after that is kind of bland, right? So,
You have to come back and work in an automobile factory or something like
right.
that.
Or you're an accountant or even a doctor checking tonsils all day. I mean,
So,
it's
so
not
the
the
level
same.
of excitement, the level of thrill isn't there anymore. And that may have accounted for the melancholy as well.
Yeah.
That I just had this sense that there was a woman to blame.
There's always a woman to blame. Of all the gin joints and all the towns and all the world, she walks into mine.
That's right.
Uh, so amazing. Let's give the folks at home a little overview of the story. They know from our conversation so far that Fred Brown is a 17-year-old and he's an Eagle Scout and he's tasked with infiltrating the Nazis and the SS. Give them a little bit more. Paint them a little picture. Give them the elevator pitch for the TV series.
So Fred comes into Germany as a Hitler Youth boy, along with his handler, who is an Italian from Brooklyn, but pretending to be a consular officer from Italy to Berlin. They arrive in Berlin by train, and in that process, Fred, or Zelly, as he's known inside of Germany, makes two mistakes. He tells a lie, and he fails to obey an order from a Gestapo officer right from the beginning. Both of those things create a great deal of suspicion of him with the Gestapo, and that suspicion follows through the end of the book. That is one of the many tapestries of mystery that flow all the way through the book. Another one is he finds his Eagle Scout picture from the cover of his Court of Honor program had been published in a Nazi magazine 2 years before he was recruited. How can that be?
Yeah.
And then another tapestry that runs through is when you are pretending to be someone else for so long at such a depth that any little mistake can get you in trouble, how much of the original you remains?
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing living. Can you imagine living your life infiltrating the Nazis, which is huge, um, at such a young age, which is also huge, but then also right from the very start, them being suspicious of you.
Yes. So to a certain extent, the story is a coming of age story, but one would have to consider coming of age in the worst possible circumstances. If you had to think of a time for an American to come of age at the worst possible time, being in Nazi Germany and in that culture and in that life would be the worst time to do it. And to try to do that as a spy is just astronomically difficult.
Yeah. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I understand you're planning a sequel?
Yes. So part of the fictionalized story is I've given Fred a wife and a baby and a new life back on the farm. And that new life will be working with the OSS, the old times CIA. And he's going to go back to Germany in 1946 at their request to gather information. This time, not against the Germans, but mainly to try to find out some things that America is still puzzled about. One of them is, how much do the Soviets know about the atomic bomb? How close were the Germans to an atomic explosion? If the war had gone on a little bit longer, would they have been able to pull one off, and where? And a little bit about whether Hitler is really dead or not, because 1946 was full of conspiracies of Hitler has gone off and living in South America or living in the Middle East. They wanted to know what really happened in that, whether the Reich was actually dead with Hitler or not. And so they send him in, probably because of the experience and the ties that he has with German people. He can go back and assume the German identity as well as continue an American identity. And in that process, he runs afoul of the Russian counterintelligence team, who are trying to catch him up.
Well, I think you've got season 2 ready for your next limited series on Hulu or Amazon or Amazon Prime or Netflix. I think it's a great book. It would be a great series.
And there'll also be a third book coming in the series as well. That happens in Budapest in 1956. Fred and Zelly are sent to Budapest, and they end up fomenting or participating in the fomenting of the Hungarian Revolution against the Soviets in 56. So there's 3 books here coming.
Amazing.
This is the first one of 3.
That's wonderful. It's nice that you have memorialized Fred, that his legacy lives on and his daring do's live on. I don't think he lived to see the publication of this book, though, right?
He did not. He died in 2010.
Yeah. Describe your relationship with him. You met with him maybe half a dozen times or more to discuss your
probably
book?
8 or 9 times, most often over lunch after that initial time on the beach at the picnic table. And a lot of that was for me to take notes and to ask questions about it. So I ended up with about 22 pages of notes in the process, and that became the book. Yeah. So as I tell the story of each of his encounters or each of the events in history that he recalled, I fictionalize those pieces and then go from there in putting the book together, tying it a lot to history. Everything in the book that is historical is very accurate.
Yeah. I know he never lived to see the publication of the book, but he must have been honored that you were so intrigued by his story, that you met with him, talked with him, took notes about what he had to say, and were planning a book. I mean, particularly when you consider how marginalized senior citizens often are in our society. They're almost treated like, okay, get out of the way, I'm moving fast here.
So he was excited to talk. As a matter of fact, most of the lunches were ones that he invited me to rather than the other way around.
Yeah, that's
kind of different than an author or a journalist trying to dig for information and they don't want to tell you.
Amazing. You put on a journalist's cap in a way to craft this book. Did you enjoy that role? Did you enjoy playing interviewer? Did you enjoy learning about another man's life like that? And do you think you will use these skills again in another publication?
So I enjoyed following the history and trying to verify events and opinions among the people who were there and would have a memory of that. And I have another book that's in outline format where I'm going to do a bit more of that. This one has to do with secret societies and rebels in America who are trying to change the government and a government that's fighting back. So it's very much more of a political thriller than any other direction. But talking to people about secret societies is something they don't really want to talk about much.
Exactly.
But you've got to dig.
So that would be set in contemporary times?
It will be set in somewhat of a mirror of contemporary times. It is a very divided government and very dissatisfied and very acrimonious between the 2 parties.
Yeah. Amazing, amazing. What type of subcultures do you think you'll tap on or tap into in this book? Are you looking for, uh, pro-revolutionaries? What type of people are you looking for to talk to?
So I spent the last years of my working life at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know Yalean culture, there are a lot of secret societies there.
Yeah.
And so those were not the secret societies that I was trying to understand. I was actually interviewing them to understand what secret societies were all about, how they worked. And so in this new book that I'm hoping to write at some spot, the secret society is going to be called the Orangemen.
Hmm.
And I won't tell you why, because that's part of the mystery of the book.
Wonderful, wonderful. Nothing to do with Trump.
Nothing to do with Trump,
When
although
you
he
hear
played to
Orange
that.
Man, you wonder.
The outline of the Orangemen was far before Trump.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Maybe I should write the book now. It might be topical.
Exactly, exactly. People will misconstrue it. Half the people will ban it because it's called Orange Man. Half the people will buy it just because it's called Orange Man. You're all
Right.
set, without a doubt. You at least got 50% of the population. That's great. How did your career in academia impact your work on this book and how you feel it's impacting your work as a writer?
So a career in academia very much involves publish and perish. And so I had to write in my field, which was information technology. And then after retiring, I decided that I was going to learn how to do the creative writing to make the book here, the Eagle Scout picture, as good as I possibly could. So I enrolled in a Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program at Albertus Magnus College in New Haven. And the first draft of the Eagle Scout picture is in their library now. So that was part of my master's thesis project. Since then, I don't know that one ever perfects writing, especially writing fiction. And so I kind of apprenticed myself to a writing coach who had published thrillers before. And he helped me immensely with this thriller, probably more in about how to leave things with a cliffhanger and pick them up at just the right moment to keep the reader's interest. And so if I've done that in this book, I owe it a lot to him.
Wonderful. Well, everybody needs a great coach. Everyone needs a great mentor. Everybody needs a great editor. You need somebody to read it. What do you think of that? Sometimes you're just too close to your work. You need somebody else to take a look at it, right?
And you need somebody who will give you critical feedback rather than just say, oh, we really like that book.
Yeah.
And so I had lots of beta readers who are doing that, including Germans.
Yeah. Amazing.
With this book.
Amazing. Before we leave you today, let me ask you this. What message do you hope readers take away from this book?
I'm going to give you three. One
Okay.
message is I hope that people understand the sacrifices of that greatest generation and try to uncover as many of the stories that they can still tell us because there aren't many of them around. The second is the call to history seems to go around in cycles. Much of what was happening in the 1930s and 1940s is reminiscent to what is happening now and has happened before in our history. And so the study of history is really important to recognize these cycles, to recognize how these things, the things that drive people, their motivations are no different now than they ever were. And history exposes them to us. And the third thing is probably a cautionary tale that says, when you live the life of someone else you're pretending to be, how much of you actually can survive?
Great. Three absolutely interesting and intriguing aspects of your writing. And I think that it'll have the readers pondering those questions, no doubt. The name of the book we've been talking about is The Eagle Scout Picture. It's written by Dr. Gary Kidney. It follows a young farm boy turned spy as he infiltrates Nazi Germany, risking everything to aid the Allies. It is packed with deception, survival, and moral dilemmas. It is a historical thriller that is a must-read for fans of books such as Eye of the Needle and All the Light We Cannot See. Gary, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Same here. Enjoyed it immensely. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time until next time on Spotlight.